I guess I've seen her just be calm about things, and not be easily rattled or easily worried about things. She's very cool.
That's Ria, my mom. Here she is holding me as a baby. And the person that she was talking about is Zita de Llana, my grandmother. From being born in a lower-class family in a province where death was prevalent, to moving to the capital, being valedictorian of her high school, and obtaining a degree, it's her history, along with her hard work and intelligence, that has gotten me to a place of privilege and opportunity today. She is what led me to be born, and has contributed immensely to the quality of education that I'm currently receiving. She is an outlier, and this is her story. On March 29th, 1968, the new People's Army of the Philippines was established. They defined themselves as an advocate organization for the proper form of government, communism. But to the rest of the world, they're known as a rebel terrorist group, determined to reach their goal of overthrowing the Philippine government and converting the Philippines into a communist nation through any means necessary. Although they formally addressed themselves as a New People's Army in 1968, their actions of rebellion started brewing long before then. It was in the early 1950s, especially, that the NPA started committing acts of terror in destitute and vulnerable provinces where the death rate was relatively higher than in other parts of the country. One such province was Santa Cruz, Laguna. This is where Zita was born. Zita de Llana's childhood was one that might be found in a fairy tale. It was simple, pleasant, and content. Her family lived in Santa Cruz, Laguna, a province nearly 100 kilometers from the capital, which was Manila. Zita, who was Zita Alvarez back then, spent her days going to school, playing marbles with her sisters, and occasionally visiting her father at his job as a prison warden.
During my childhood pala, when my papa comes from work, he used to ride the bicycle. And Lola Marita, when we see him coming from the corner from our house, maybe about 100 meters from our house in a bike, we will race up to him because I want to see what was in his hand, the bag. And it's only pala the container that he used for lunch. Then he will ask us to pull up the white hair from his head, and one white hair will be 1 cent, 1 centavo. Sometimes we will pull even the black one, and we will count it as gray hair. Daya, no? Pero he knew what we were doing. Anyway, those were the times.
But, like all fairy tales, this was just the beginning of hardship. It was a hot summer day in the year 1950 when such calamity struck. That morning, Zita had been on the way to Manila with her mother to spend a week or so with her older sister Jovita, who lived there with her husband. On their way, they were stopped by what seemed to be a group of barangay guards, which were volunteers who chose to keep the province safe. They informed Zita and Honorata, her mother, that rebels were in town and fighting was just about to break out. Concerned about their safety, the guards took Zita and Honorata to a coconut plantation. When news that the fighting had stopped reached Zita and Honorata, they were told to proceed directly home rather than continuing their journey. Upon arriving, Zita promptly opened the door, expecting to find their home exactly the way they had left it. Unfortunately, that wasn't the case. Lying in a growing pool of blood in the middle of the kitchen floor was Juanito V. Alvarez. Zita's father, my great-grandfather, had been shot. My grandmother, just 11 years old, watched her father take his last breath. Later on, a compadre, or godfather, informed Honorata what had happened. Juanito was the jail warden on duty when the rebel group arrived. The group of barangay guards that had stopped Zita and her mother earlier that day were actually that very same band of rebels that would come to define themselves as the New People's Army. Their aim was to release criminals held in the local jail, and they did so without any mercy. Juanito, a patriotic man, stood his ground and did not back down even when a gun was put to his head. His dying request was to be brought back to his humble home so he could pass in peace. Tragic as it was, Juanito's death was undeniably a turning point in Zita's life. With the sole breadwinner of their family gone, Honorata had no choice but to pack up and move the family to live with Jovita and her husband in Manila. Living in Manila, Zita's world was flipped upside down. All of a sudden, she was open to a future that never would have been possible if her family had stayed in that province. In Manila, Zita went to a much more developed school than the one in Santa Cruz. Now, her family lived in the same city of the best university in the country, making it more likely for Zita and her siblings to pursue a higher education, something that her parents could have never even thought of. It's undeniable that moving to the capital was a major factor that contributed to Zita's success. But her future and the opportunities that were available to her because she lived in Manila came at the devastating cost of her father's life. The very existence of her happily ever after depended upon her father's the end. Ten hours after the attack on Pearl Harbor in Hawaii, the Japanese invaded the Philippines. They occupied the nation between 1942 and 1945. During those 3 years, the Philippine people did their best to combat the Japanese by forming groups and alliances. Through the efforts of the Philippine Army and military aid from the United States, the Philippines was eventually liberated. Love in wartime. Nothing has ever been as blissfully ironic. In Zita's case, nothing has ever contributed more to her success. It was smack in the middle of World War II when the infatuation of Jovita, Zita's older sister, and Leoning de la Llana, Jovita's future husband, emerged, ultimately impacting not just the future of Jovita and her descendants, but Zita's as well. Leoning de la Llana was an officer for the Philippine Army, stationed in Quiapo, Manila, living with his aunt. His daily life in the mid-1940s was simple and routine-like. He woke up early, went to work, and then returned home. That was until Jovita came along.
Ay nako, during Japanese time, my lola siya, the sister of my father, lived in Quiapo. That's center of Manila, okay. Quiapo. And then Lolo Leoning lived naman doon sa auntie niya across the house of my auntie. So, both of them can see each other. That was Japanese time. Yeah. They will, Lolo Luning will see my sister, Lola Bita, across the street.
Okay.
Tapos, then he courted her. He will go to Santa Cruz and courted her. That's how they met. Lola Luning was already working, but Lola Bita is, I think, studying in Philippine Normal College to be a teacher.
Okay.
That's why they saw each other. And then, when Lola Luning will go to Santa Cruz to court Lola Bita, in the living room, Lola Marita and I will be peeping from the curtain, no? Mm-hmm. To look at them, to see them. Then Lola Luning will throw a hat full of candies. After we pick them up, we'll go. And they'll be alone na in the living room. That every time he comes visit, he'll just throw some candies to us and we'll go away. Nakatawa, no? So that they'll be alone together in the living room. Yeah. So that's it.
4 years after the end of Japanese occupation in the Philippines, Leoning decided the time was right. He asked Jovita to be his wife. She, of course, said yes. They got married in 1949 and officially moved to live together in Manila. where they spent their days cherishing each other's company and eventually bearing children. But why is this relevant to Zita's success? How did her sister's marriage contribute to her own future? The answer is simple. After the death of Zita and Jovita's father, the Alvarez family had no means of making a living. The decision to move to Manila from Santa Cruz instead of another city was because Leoning and Jovita lived in Manila. Had Jovita never encountered Leoning, there never would have been a breadwinner for the Alvarez family to fall back on. Moreover, there would have been no one to push Zita in her studies. Growing up with her sister's family, Leoning became the role model for Zita. She saw him as her second father. He would be the one to fund not just her high school education, but her college education as well. Here was a man not biologically related to Zita or any of Jovita's siblings, who still raised them as if they were his own, using his own earnings to ensure that they all had a bright future. It was Leoning's characteristics, morals, and his love for Jovita that ultimately contributed to Zita's current success. Congratulations! You're valedictorian! It was just a regular day toward the end of the school year when Zita heard those words. Her room advisor, who was like a teacher assistant, pulled her into one of the rooms of Quezon City High School to tell her the good news. Zita's jaw dropped. Despite taking optional math classes, she didn't excel in English. She felt as though she didn't deserve the title of valedictorian. Nevertheless, Zita was undeniably grateful. Being valedictorian at the time meant more than just looking good on college applications. It actually guaranteed a full free year of college education. To understand the full history behind the impact of being valedictorian, it's necessary to look back a couple of decades before Zina's senior year. Rafael Palma, a Filipino politician in the 1920s, was a massive advocate for education. In 1924, Palma was the president of the University of the Philippines, which was known and still continues to be known as the best university of the country. Palma revived the University Student Council, with one of his first projects being the awarding of scholarships and medals to outstanding students. Students such as my grandmother, Zita. Although it was Zita's hard work and intelligence that got her to the top academic spot of her graduating class, it was Palma's passion for education that got her a full free year at the best university the Philippines could offer. Because Zita was valedictorian, her family was able to afford not just her college education, but those of her siblings as well. This accomplishment opened doors for Zita, and it eventually led to her acquiring a degree in pharmacy. The fact that she was able to acquire education at a college level, regarding all the factors that could have prevented her otherwise, justifies her place as an outlier. Like my mom said, Zita de la Llana is strong, hardworking, intelligent. She doesn't let bad situations rattle her or set her back. It's true that without those characteristics, she wouldn't be in the place of success that she's in today. But it's also because of the opportunities that she happened to be open to, due to factors that were out of her control, such as moving to Manila, the morals of her brother-in-law, and the scholarship program. It's because of these occurrences lining up with her personal traits that she's an outlier. Without the traits of my grandmother and the opportunities that came her way, all of these photographs, all the weddings, vacations, reunions, other family members, and opportunities in my life would all be non-existent. I owe my place as an outlier to the life of my grandmother, and because of that, I'm eternally grateful.